So welcome back, everybody. It's great to have you here. I think lots of us are all still trying to figure out options for getting back to the office, and there's definitely a lot of discussions taking place, and there's certainly a wide range of issues. We've had a great series of programs, and today we continue that conversation, and we've got a pretty exciting conversation lined up for today. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm Bob Fox, principal at Fox Architects and publisher of Work Design magazine, and I'm really excited to kick off this event. Today, we continue our series of programs that Work Design magazine has put together in an effort to provide a comprehensive look at getting back to the office. We call it Work Design Flex, and that's really to represent how much more flexible and multidimensional the workplace has become. There's lots of information out there and a lot of opinions, and we've tried to cut through the bias and bring together experts who can offer solid insight. Just to give you a little bit of background, Work Design magazine was started in 2010 as a way to connect with our peers, to elevate the conversation and share ideas, to improve and maintain a high level of valuable services. It's meant to be a resource for high quality and high performing workplaces. It's focused on the workplace and it's open to all. And today is another great example. All of us have probably attended a number of back to the office events. And as we put these events together, we realized that one program can only focus on a small slice of that challenge. So we brought together some of the best minds in the industry to share their expertise and how they're seeing things change. There's a lot of opinions, there's rapid change, experimentation, uncertainty, and confusion. And hopefully through this conversation, we can offer some insight into the issues and the options that are going to be best for you and for your organization. And the conversation doesn't end today. Next week is actually our last week, and we're fortunate to get three very influential leaders into the same space. We've got Lenny Bedoin from CBRE, Antonia Cardone from Cushman & Wakefield, and Lori Lewis from JLL, who are all global workplace experts sharing what they're seeing. And the conversations leading up to that have been very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to having a conversation with Jeremy Neuner from Google. He and I are going to have some fun discussing what we think the future of the office might look like. So if you haven't done so already, sign up for that now. Before we get started, I'd really like to thank all of our presenters and their teams. They've contributed their time and they've been very generous with their time and their expertise. And especially our sponsors, Envoy, which has been with us and has done a lot. And today, Nook, who is sponsoring this session. Nook is a family of pods, booths, and shelters. They're little sanctuary spaces created originally for introverts and people on the autism spectrum. But they offer these great little places that you can find solace and escape from the challenges of the busy office environment. And our sponsors are critical to support these conversations and to help make these possible. I'd also like to recognize Workplace Evolutionaries, which is a workplace-centric community within IFMA that's led by some of the brightest minds in the workplace world. And we're fortunate to have one of our speakers today, Kay Sargent. So thanks. And then to all of our contributors who share their knowledge and expertise with all of you. So thank you. Getting into today's program, one sad note, we originally had Stephen Battaglia scheduled to have a conversation with Rex today, and we found out that unfortunately Stephen passed away suddenly on June 22nd. He was a respected leader in the DC HR community and led the Human Resource Leadership Forum. Stephen recently did a fantastic job for us leading another event, and he will certainly be sorely missed. But on a much brighter note for today's program, it's great to have two longtime friends. I think we've known each other for 20 plus years. So I expect we're going to have some fun today. But Rex Miller and Kay Sargent, both of whom are well-respected and accomplished leaders and whose reputations have preceded them. Rex Miller leads Mindshift, Futures Research Consulting and Executive Coaching Organization. His more than 40 years of experience in the AEC industry has placed him at the intersection of numerous complex challenges, including the common nightmare of delivering capital projects, workplace disengagement, toxic shadow cultures, workplace health and well-being. Rex has written several books, which I've been fortunate to participate in a few of them, covering these topics. One is The Commercial Real Estate Revolution, Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, The Healthy Workplace Nudge, and Whole. Rex also turned me on to my Whoop band, which I look at every day to see how much sleep and how much exertion I've had. Kay Sargent brings more than 35 years of experience. Kay is a recognized expert on workplace design and strategy issues. She's an award-winning designer who has worked with several Fortune 500 companies to optimize their global real estate portfolios and create innovative and work environments on their unique organizational DNA. As co-director of HOK's workplace team, a practice that supports organizations undertaking multiple projects in various locations, and a member of HOK's board of directors, Kay is responsible for helping clients redefine how, when, and where their people work, and supports a holistic design approach that integrates organizations' people, processes, and technologies. She was recently selected from her field of peers to provide congressional subject matter expert testimony to the U.S. House of Representatives on the federal real post-COVID-19 view from the private sector. Now, Kay has also introduced me to her daughter, Katie, who is a brilliant and very talented and incredibly well-organized professional to whom I'm very grateful. Katie is the powerhouse that has put this whole program together. So thank you, Kay and Katie. So I guess to provide a little bit of context for what we're discussing today, the people that make up the workforce, and more specifically, the mental and physical health, the choices that we make, and the people-related issues surrounding bringing people back to the office. We've been out of the office for 18 months with very limited human interaction. We haven't had to get dressed. We've been subject to political polarization, racism, climate concerns, and more. We've probably consumed more alcohol, and we've been sitting at our desks at home for 10 hours a day and suffering through Zoom calls. Our body and our minds are a little bit out of shape. And just as a short aside, I found out that I've actually got dead butt syndrome, which is also known as glute amnesia. And if you spend hours of day sitting, some of those muscles actually stop working. So if you've got pains in your hip or down your leg, actually I was told I needed to get a hip replacement, but it's all just muscle stuff. So anyway.
I really don't mean to laugh, Bob, but I can't help it. I'm so sorry.
So I thought I'd start things off and have a little fun today. I've got a little short video here that I think kind of gets to the point of what we're trying to talk about that I'm just going to share. It's 38 seconds. You have to sort of listen quickly because she talks very fast, but this will start the conversation off.
Things are starting to roll out. Let's start talking about going back to the office. How are we all feeling about that? Oh, that's great news. Full time? Doesn't work for you? No. Can't wait to be back. How long do we have? Can't take me away from you. We have an office. This is reopened. No. How are we feeling? Fantastic. Not to be dramatic. I will quit. On my way. Oh, I wish I could. Just let me know. I haven't been vaccinated. Anyone else? I don't have any office clothes. I also don't have the ability to control my facial expression. Kim, what are your thoughts? Kim? No, thank you.
So I've obviously also gotten addicted to Instagram. You know, that was Laura Whaley, who was social media on TikTok and Instagram. So, so to start the conversation off, let's ask the question, you know, what's the general sense of people returning to the office, and can you give us a state of the workforce? But actually, before you guys answer that, let me just say, we've kind of set a time limit for this conversation for each of these questions so we can try to get through it. I think there will probably be some Q&A from the audience. So feel free, if you do have questions, put them into the Q&A and I'll try to keep track of those. And if they're appropriate, some of those I'll ask during the conversation. So
surprise, surprise, you had to put a timer on Rex and I, so we didn't talk for hours and hours on it. So I'm going to dive into that first question, Rex, if it's okay with you. I think
you go for it.
Yeah, it's all over the place. There are some people that are so eager to get back, they just are like they're running to the office. And there are other people that have the exact opposite reaction. And I kind of look at this, you know, I don't think people are as adverse to change as most people think that they are. I think what people are adverse to is the transition. And we are going to, it's a big transition. And after 16 months of this, people have gotten into a whole new routine. And now we're going to be asking them to change that routine in a way that they're not familiar with. So it's kind of like we're all kids at the end of summer having to go back to school. We've been there, we know what it's like, but it's like, oh my God, you know, it's that transition. And I think we need to be really sensitive to the fact that you know, we kind of have this heightened sensitivity. And I jokingly say, but I'm not joking. If you think there's been fights in grocery stores because, you know, there's somebody that you're encountering that's doing something for 5 minutes, wait until we get back into the office. And you're sitting next to somebody for 8 hours a day, potentially, who is doing, you know, has maybe the exact opposite reaction that you might be having. They might be perfectly fine with walking around and sharing and touching and hugging, and you might be very adverse to that. So I think it's a powder keg that we're waiting to see how it all just happens.
Yeah, and to add to the level of powder keg, you know, prior to the pandemic, about 4% of the adult population registered as having some form of post-traumatic stress, and the same percentage for depression. Now it's projected to be somewhere around 40%. And I think lessons from the military, with people coming back from war, trying to reacclimate into normal life, I think that's an adequate kind of analogy of what we're experiencing. And if you've been tracking, you know, grocery stores, you're also tracking flights. In 2019 and 2020, there's a list of special people who get banned from flights forever, like trying to open the exit door in mid-flight or something like that. Well, through May, that number was 2,500. So that's, you know, that's more than 100 times increase. So what's happening is, with this level of stress we have, that we've lived with for 18 months, there's a couple forms of trauma. There's the one we're typically familiar with, which is you experience directly something traumatic. But there's also what's called a level 2 trauma, where you're under sustained stress and pressure for an extended period of time, when your brain just recycles and says, this is permanent, I'm in permanent vigilance. Different narrative, different story, same brain wiring, and it's invisible. It's one of those invisible things. And so what Kay is saying is, what's likely to happen is something that would have been a normal, oh, you bumped into me on the airplane, and I would have just thought to my head, what an idiot, you know, they're inconsiderate. Now people are at that threshold, and it's called an amygdala hijack. You know, you're at that threshold point. We all have a buffer or threshold. We all know what it's like when we haven't gotten a good night's sleep and somebody says something and we react. Now that's magnified. And I think there's a reconditioning. You know, I did a workshop Monday, and I'm starting to travel. I'm already forgetting what city and where, but it was clear to me that they were not in workshop condition. By about 2 p.m, they were fried. Normally, you know, with good breaks and all that, you could get through a 9 to 4 interactive workshop, no problem. We have a lot of reconditioning to do, a lot of new expectations, and people are coming in, as Kay said, all over the map. I haven't found one consensus.
Yeah, well, and Rex, I'm going to tag into something that you said about, you know, people are returning to kind of the normal. It isn't normal. And I think that's part of the thing that we need to be aware of is, if your expectation is you're going to walk into the office that you left, you're going to be surprised, because if nobody's touched your things in 18 months, you might have, you know, your calendar will say March 2020. You might have images or pictures on your desk, or things from colleagues that aren't even there anymore, right? And the events of the last 18 months are all going to be compacted, and you're going to all of a sudden have this harsh reality of how much has changed in that period. And the other option is that your company has come in and packed up everything so that they could do a thorough cleaning, and your desk, there's nothing there. And there's signs everywhere that are telling you to beware. And about 30% of the people are in the office, so it's grossly underpopulated, and you feel like you're in somebody else's space. It's vaguely familiar, but it's totally different, and it's underpopulated. And that's the experience that many people had in New York City when they returned. is it just didn't feel right, and they didn't feel comfortable there.
So we've got about 2 minutes left here on this question, but how do we help people, especially those that might be extra sensitive or, have neurodiversity types of issues?
Yeah. So we try not to, there's a great piece the other day about Sally Augustine about trying to keep things as familiar as possible. And to some degree, I agree with that. But I also believe that we need to the bar has changed and the expectation has changed of what it should be. So, a lot of people are throwing up signs all over the place to help people navigate. All that does is scream danger, 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 right? So try to minimize any of those kinds of things. Try to help people understand what they're going to experience, so it's not a shock when they come in. Anything we can do, and again, these are just basic rules of change management, right? Anything that we can do to help set the expectation and to ease people in and lead with empathy and understanding is going to be really, really critical. And understand that some people might have a really bad reaction and just be like, you know what, I'm not ready for this. And we need to understand that.
Yeah, I think too, looking at stress points through the experience of an employee coming into the parking lot, the reception area, any kind of stress point and any kind of reminder of loss, like the calendar, those are trigger points, and those stressors accumulate. Being aware, giving people flexibility, giving people time to acclimate, reconnecting people in conversation circles. I've worked with Dr. Jernigan on some story templates that managers can use to help kind of reconnect in a very safe way and process. So part of what we have to realize is that it's not just coming back, but we all have to process, come to terms, tell our stories, feel safe again. That's a leadership management, emotional intelligence level that we've not had to do before, but it's going to be necessary.
Rex, that's actually a great segue into the next topic, which is really the balance between the C-suite and the workforce. And I imagine that's a big stressor right there, but you've got a lot of conflict, in that. So how do you guys see that taking shape?
Wow. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and you guys can cut off the limb if you want to, but I'm gonna say that there is such a thing as a stupid question. And we're asking a lot of stupid questions right now. If you ask a 5-year-old what they want for dinner, they're going to tell you they want chocolate. Then you have to walk that back. Okay, that wasn't the right question. We need to ask better questions. And so when we ask the workforce, what do you want to do? Well, I want to never have to go anyplace. That's what I personally want. And I'll give you kind of the example that I use on this about that rift or that gap. Which we're all watching play out in live time, right? So Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has said we want people to come back, and he's giving some flexibility to that, and he's allowing people to work remotely, which is something that they never did culturally before. And by the way, anybody that believed the tech companies were going to let everybody work remotely forever hasn't been paying attention to their entire culture is around fail fast, getting people together, the synergy of being together. Okay. But the workforce from Apple wrote a letter saying, you know what, we don't really want that. Like, we want more control over this. And I think, we have to meet somewhere in the middle. I'm not saying that we should not care what the workforce asks, but we asked a bad question. And the right question should be, as a company, what do we need to do as a collective so that you have a good quality of life and feel safe and comfortable, but that this company can be successful and succeed? Because, Steve Jobs built one of the most expensive buildings on the entire planet to give his people a place where they could all come together, because he believes so strongly in that synergy that happens when people come together. And I think that most Apple employees would agree that that's important for their company. They don't have to do that 5 days a week, but that being together actually does help build social capital, speed to innovation, all of that. And so we need to think about what's right for the company. I think right now the C-suite is very focused on business resiliency, and the workforce is very focused on what you asked me. What do I personally want for myself? And somewhere we need to meet in the middle.
So that gives me the opportunity to take the analogy on a different side, because there's the Jamie Dimons of the world who said, "You will come back." And so the analogy I'll use is a teenager. So you can't let a teenager do whatever they want, but at the same time, just telling them this is what you're going to do without helping understand why.
You're such a parent.
So, and so I think part of it is the story the C-suite needs to understand on how employees will be more productive, healthier, they'll grow, they'll learn. The new value proposition, I think, is unclear. And what a lot of companies learned that I've worked with is that they had the old mentality of if you're not in the office, you're not working. Or if I can't see you, then I don't know what you're doing. And what this did, and I work a lot with a lot of construction firms that have what you might call old school philosophy on command and control. What they discovered is, gee, we can manage a project remotely. Teams, we kind of used it. Now we're experts in Teams. I don't know why anybody would want to use Teams, but there's people who actually like Teams. And I think it really challenged some of the premise of not everybody has to be in the office and not everybody is part of the innovation process, but there's a lot of areas of the company that people discovered, the production side of things, that functions seamlessly without having to come together. And there are certain business models, like the WordPresses of the world and others that are distributed. So I think there's some things we can learn. And again, I think it's a negotiation and a navigation where I see the C-suite can improve is to help make the case and to help create the opportunity for people to see themselves in what Dr. Roizen calls that empathetic future. People have a hard time adapting to things that are new or new expectations unless they can see how they're going to be successful in the new reality. And that,
and Rex has a great comment that says, we're dealing with adults, not children. So you are correct that we are dealing with adults. But I think, sometimes it just kind of amazes me sometimes that people forget if the organization is not successful, then the individuals within that organization probably aren't going to be successful either. And I don't think that sometimes we have, some companies don't have that collective cultural mentality that everybody is in this together. There is this is me, this is the company, right? And I think a lot of it depends on your culture. If you're in a company that the culture is we're all in this together, or it's an ESOP where company, you're invested in the company, you are absolutely thinking with that adult brain. But I think that there are some traits that are ageless, whether you're a 5-year-old, a teenager, or an adult. And when people, any time that we go through change, the very first reaction that most people have is, how does this impact me personally, right? And that's just our gut reaction and our survival mechanism.
Hey, I think, on this topic, there have been a lot of resignations recently and, articles about that happening. And, I'm just curious, is that the result of a misalignment, or are people just moving around the country to different locations?
I will tell you what we are finding is that there are a lot of people that are just burnt out, and a lot of people that are just leaving, and they're just taking a break, or they're leaving an industry, or they are taking this opportunity to do something different. They've had a chance to really kind of reset their whole value system, and maybe their old job didn't align with what they now believe their value system is, or maybe the way that they want to live their lives. I think a lot of this literally, and Rex, we were talking about this the other day, people are fried. I mean, there is the mental energy that it takes. Yes, I don't have to physically get up and go to an office every day, et cetera, but there are no breaks. I mean, I literally will sit here at 7 o'clock in the morning, and last night I was sitting here at 8:30 at night still, for this is why you have dead butt syndrome, by the way, Bob, right? We're sitting, staring at computers constantly on, going from one call to another to another. There is no mental downtime. And the energy that takes and the toll that is taking is really pretty overwhelming and exhausting.
Yeah, I think that's one of the factors the companies haven't even addressed yet, is the cognitive load of doing what you were doing, Kay, back to back to back. Dr. Jernigan and I have been measuring that. I've been using that band that Bob talks about, and it measures load or performance, what that does. And cognitive load and emotional load affects your body, your autonomic nervous system, elevated heart rate, cortisol, all that, the same way physical. And it's twice the level. Your brain, it consumes about 20% of your calories in normal conditions, but in these conditions, it's up to 40%. So for every hour you're doing Zoom, add 1 hour of work. So if you did 10 hours, you put in a 20-hour day. And that's one element companies need to come to terms with, that the equity, the load that people are taking on doing virtual work versus coming into the office is totally different. So
yeah,
go ahead.
And Lisa Killaby has a great point, right? So she wrote in the comments, are the total number of resignations in 2021 up because nobody wanted to change jobs in 2020 because there was so much unknown? So maybe people that would have resigned over a longer period of time didn't, and now it's just the floodgate is open. So I do believe, Lisa, that there is some validity to that. But I think we are seeing a lot of people that are just checking out. They're just like, I need to take a mental break. I am just done.
Is it possible to manage that? I mean, Kay, I know what you're talking about. It's like we get sucked into what we're doing, and it's like the next thing we know, 3 or 4 hours have passed. And, I'm just wondering, there's a way to discipline ourselves so that we don't get burned out and I don't get dead butt syndrome.
Yeah. Well, I would say, we need to work like athletes. So athletes have found that they are the most effective when they train in 90-minute blocks. And then after 90 minutes, there is diminishing returns for any workout that you're doing. You need to physically take a break and let your body refresh. And the same thing goes for work and or your brain. If you are not setting aside time to physically take a break, change your perspective, get fresh air, take a walk, you have diminishing returns. And so even in the office, we would say you need to get up and move and be active. And we would say the same thing at home. So, setting up 45-minute conference calls instead of an hour. So you have 15 minutes to just like breathe, get a drink of water, go to the ladies' room, whatever that might be, or go outside. Setting out blocks of time where this is my thinking time, or this, and putting that on the calendar, I think is really important as well, because there's a lot of tasks that we do that we never assign time for, but we have to squeeze them in, right? And so I think we just need to get better at managing our own time and being more disciplined and learning how to say no to some things, because some of us can't say no to things. And, I identify with that. But we need to manage our own time a lot better.
So what are the real health issues, that we're facing, and the risks that we're facing? I mean, the load on the body, the mental issues, the stress, what are some of the risks associated with that?
Metabolic syndrome, chronic disease. So part of dealing with stress is unhealthy coping behavior. So we've seen a lot more drugs taken, sleeping medication, antidepressants, comfort food, things that the sugars. So that's a real challenge on looking for those healthier coping behaviors. And then those interrupt your sleep. I think the number one thing anybody can do to help get some bounce back is just a quality night's sleep. We all know how we function when we don't have a quality night's sleep. But if you're in bed less than 7 hours a night, you're not getting enough sleep. And then if you're doing certain things in the evening, like drinking alcohol or watching, anything with blue light, any screen, you're interrupting your sleep patterns. So for me, that's been a crusade. Bob knows that's been a crusade for a couple of years, because that is stress and poor sleep are so correlated. And then the behaviors that lead to that, that's a huge, that's a huge shift in elevating your resiliency.
Yeah, and I'm going to say movement, right? So, sorry to say this, but ergonomic furniture is put in place because we are doing something that we shouldn't be doing in the first place, which is sitting stagnantly for an extended period of time. If you are in a situation where you don't have a choice, you absolutely need really, really good ergonomic setups. Okay, and you might need those even if you have shorter periods of time. But the best thing that we can get up to do is to get up and move. Physical exercise actually helps with your mental health. It helps you sleep better. It helps with all of those things. And so even just changing your position throughout the day, whether it's taking a conference call from the couch or then sitting at a table or then being outside, movement is really critical. And they say, Rex, you know this because you've got one of these on your wrist, that you should walk 10,000 steps a day. Before COVID, the average American only walked about 3,500 a day and was only standing or vertical about an hour and a half a day. I want you to think about that. Our bodies were not designed for that. But during COVID, the number of steps that people are taking has dropped radically to about 1,000 a day, because all you're doing is walking from here to the bedroom or here to the kitchen, right? Yeah. And so we need to force ourselves to take those mental breaks and to move and to be active, and that will help a lot.
We've got a great question here that it says, what would you say to an organizational leadership who's afraid to address any items related to mental health and would instead prefer not to communicate the subject?
You're burying your head in the sand.
Yeah, that person's in denial because nobody has gotten through this without experiencing some sense of loss. And there is a leadership mindset that I've got to be tough. I've got to put the face of resiliency and not show any weaknesses. That I think that's just misguided. It elevates stress. It creates an unsafe environment where people feel like I can't be real, can't be honest. It's toxic. And so leaders just to be real and recognize I'm tired or I had a bad day or whatever. The reality, everybody's experienced it. So if I see a leader who's behaving like nothing affects them, then I don't trust that leader. And so that's what's going on through the people as well. They don't have my interest at heart, and I can't trust them.
I think this is one of the areas where Europe is really ahead of us. And I think they're probably about three to 5 years ahead of us on this. They had a CEO of a major company had a nervous breakdown. And about the same time that both princes came out and shared their stories about their struggles with mental health. And in this country, it's still a badge of honor to say how much how hard you worked or how overstressed you are. And so it is very American, and it's also Japanese. But even the Japanese are starting, I think, to get ahead of us on this one. But in Europe, they really are, whether it's mandating breaks, whether it's forcing things, they have legislation that says if you don't respond to an email on the weekend, you can't be fired. Some companies are turning off their servers at nighttime so that their people aren't being flooded with emails and off hours. And so I think it is something that we need to address, because it is probably, Towers Watson came out 5 years ago and said that stress is the biggest threat to the workforce that we are paying zero attention to, and we really need to address that. And that was before COVID.
Well, and the pandemic just upped that. The Japanese actually have a word called karoshi, which is death by work. And in the United States prior to the pandemic, work was the fifth leading cause of death. And it's interesting to note that heart attacks dropped during the pandemic by 40%. So they were about 800,000, dropped down to around 600,000. Prior to the pandemics, heart attacks jumped 20% on Monday. So there's something endemic that Kay is getting to that we need to come to terms with and realize that the treadmill we were on was unsustainable. And the blessing, if there's a silver lining in the pandemic, we got off the treadmill. We could step back and say, I don't want to do this anymore, what I used to do. This is how I prefer to work. But it's going to be hard. You know, I said I wasn't going to stack travel. Well, what did I do last week? I stacked travel. So old habits die hard. You know, we have to have these conversations. I'm not hearing companies having these conversations. What do we want to preserve from the past? What do we want to give up from the past? It's kind of start, stop, continue. I think that's a very healthy dialogue if we get those conversations going at a management and leadership level.
How about there's a question here about our companies expanding their commitment to mental health services or broadening what is covered. Our types of benefits particularly are critical, or any types of benefits that are particularly critical to consider.
Well, look, most companies have, employee assistance programs. In fact, the average company pays about $750 per employee for employee benefit systems and programs. And less than 5% of the employee population ever even use them or tap into them. So I'm willing to bet that your company already has some of the things. How will they advertise those? How will they share those? How will you're encouraged to use those? I think is a question. And I think some people are afraid to use those because they're afraid that it will impact their status. But I think it's important to leverage what we already are using. And then some companies have changed their PTO. Used to be like you had vacation and sick leave, rolling all that together. Some people can say that helps. Some people say that doesn't. But I think that there are a lot of programs out there that are grossly underutilized. So I would say start with that.
But,
Yeah, I just need to jump on board on this one too. Wellness programs don't improve health. They don't lower cost. They don't work. And a lot of that is like the underutilization of EAP programs. Well, there's also stigmas attached to going and getting help, or you take your PTO, but nobody else does. So there's a difference between cultures of health, cultures that promote health and well-being, and healthy cultures that are just naturally positive, uplifting, and we need to work on the culture side. The programs are, for me, kind of a stopgap or something. It's a risk management tool. It's not really there to promote a culture of wellness and well-being. So we've got a lot of work. I think this is an opportunity to really examine how do we want to promote health, well-being, productivity, growth.
We've got a question here. It says, please give us your view of employee engagement and how companies need to change their policies to maintain it.
Wow.
Well, I think there's a few things. Employee engagement is one thing, and we know that it's suffered for a long time. That we know a lot of employees are highly disengaged. The scariest thing is that the US has the most engaged population on the entire planet. No matter how bad ours is, we still are better than most other countries, which is absolutely frightening. Okay. The other thing that we need to do is, and it's becoming more of an issue, and the statistics around it are even worse, is do you feel fulfilled? And the younger generation does not feel fulfilled. They do not feel like they are being put in a position where their true potential is being tapped into or utilized. And that is far more frustrating. If you feel like your talents are being wasted, man, that is a huge thing. But one of the biggest things when we look at employee engagement, the things that really drive that are, do you have a supportive leader? Do they recognize you? Do they give you opportunities? It's the EQ stuff. It's an emotional intelligence. And if you don't believe that, I want you to think about this one thing. Think about the best boss that you ever had and why you think they're the best boss. And then think about the worst boss you ever had. That's probably easier for most people, but that's sad. And why? I'm willing to bet it had nothing to do with how intelligent that person was. It had everything to do with how they made you feel. And right now, when everybody has a heightened sensitivity to everything, leadership really needs to lean in hard on the emotional intelligence and having empathy and leading with empathy and understanding that people are all over the place from an emotional standpoint and from a safety and security standpoint. And we need to understand that. And just forcing people into a box is not the answer.
The Gallup research supports everything you said and also points out that only 18% of managers have those natural EQ skills. So that means
that's because they're mostly men. Sorry to say that, but statistics will show that women tend to relate more to individuals. If you look at the Athenia doctrine, they have 10 traits of leadership, and women are hit 8 of those, and men only hit 2. And the 2 that men hit are decisive and resilient. But all the other things about connecting and emotional intelligence tend to be more associated. Women tend to connect more. They tend to through stories and personal things, where men tend to do that less, right? So, that.
Yeah, it's a high bar to hit. Training isn't going to do it. Coming up with different criteria for who we promote and who we put into those management positions. My big shift in business has been from doing workshops to coaching. I was sharing with a colleague, and I just put a note out. Most of the women I'm coaching are asking questions about, how do I become better? How do I help my team? Most of the men that I'm coaching want me to fix a problem for them. And it's a totally different mindset. And I think you're right, Kay, that we've got a lot to move forward in pulling that, those tend and befriend traits that women managers do much better naturally.
Let me kind of take all of this and I think maybe try to shift the conversation a little bit to, we've got a lot of organizations right now that are struggling to try to figure out how to get people back. And, so I think from a, health, mental, aspect, but also I think from the physical environment, coming back. So what kind of suggestions or recommendations would you have to try to address those, so that people can get, everybody back into the office, safely and healthy and, with reduced stress?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Kay on this. This is your backyard.
Yeah, so I would say that we really need to think about the purpose of place, right? And I think, 30 years ago, you had to go to the office. You had to go to work. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have those kinds of things. But today we do. And now it's actually socially acceptable for people to work remotely as well. So I think one of the things that we really need to do is rethink the purpose of place. And I think there's 2 really fundamental questions that we need to ask. One is, what can we not get working remotely? And the second one is, what do we want to bring with us? So the first one, if you think about it, it could be, we may not have the ergonomic setup. We may not have access to connectivity. We may not have those enhanced interactive tools that we might use, or gathering spaces, or the abilities to come together. So we need to focus on making sure we're maximizing those types of spaces and elements. But then we also need to think about, what are we going to miss? And so we've kind of come up with this whole scenario of what we're calling lifestyle studios with our clients, where what are those things that you've really gotten into during the pandemic that you might want to bring with you? So whether it's, your plants that you have. And so some neighborhoods might be set up to be pet friendly. Some neighborhoods might be set up to be, for the gardeners or for different things. Or you might have lending libraries or people that have really got into cooking. So can we bring some of those elements, the best of what we had at home, into the workplace so that everybody can benefit from that. And then that also helps build that social capital, because social capital has really eroded over the last 16 months, and it's wearing really thin right now. And we need to think about ways that we can rebuild that as we get back together. And we also need to understand that people have a heightened sensitivity now. It's not just people that are neurodiverse. The entire world now has a heightened sensitivity into how close we are to each other, and the sounds and what we're touching. And so we need to understand that. We need to bring in some of those elements that apply mostly to the hypo or hypersensitive individuals to really benefit everybody in the workplace.
Yeah, I think one opportunity too are transition spaces. Coming in to an organization, that's a great opportunity to make it a connecting area, as opposed to kind of I know security is important for a lot of companies, but what a lot of schools are doing, especially with kids that come out of at-risk communities, is the very first thing they do is they create this social circle of greeting and connection. So before they get into cognitive work, they work on lowering that sympathetic nervous side, the tension, stress, anxiety of commute or whatever. Lowering that down allows the cognitive, the prefrontal cortex, to actually connect. And so social connection allows people to actually do better work. There's a company called Next Jump in New York City. They do that as a matter of course. Everybody has what they call a talking buddy. And the way they set up these talking partners is that they will pick someone that's the opposite. The way they index people is you tend to be either humble or confident. And then having that complement helps balance you out. So you may talk about your commute in the morning. You may talk about good things happening, but what it does is it gets all that out of you, and then you can make the transition. I think that's an opportunity in between meetings, a transition space, having recovery zones, non-technology zones. These are all things we can do to make recovery built into what we're doing.
John Campbell's got a couple of questions here. Do we feel that over a period of time that more people will go to the office than we initially anticipate? And has the focus been on the differences, what we thought is being put on the sense of familiarity that is missing?
Yeah, so John, I think people are grossly underestimating that, right? It's kind of like people are hesitant right now because there's that transition that they have to get over. But people have been working remotely for 20 years, and there's a lot of lessons that we've learned. And I think people are responding right now to the situation that they're in. And many people have never been in this situation before. But what we know from clients that have these programs is that the second some people are in the office and other people aren't, that FOMO, or that fear of missing out, or I'm not visible, so I'm not there, or I'm missing on something, is going to kick in. And I think when people start going back to the office and kind of connecting, they're going to see the value of that again. And I think some old habits are probably going to, that muscle memory will come back to some degree. And I think a lot of our clients are grossly underestimating how many people ultimately will. Now, how quickly that happens. We've said that we think we're in for a rough 18 months, that it may not be back to those levels. But the second some people start being in the office and other people aren't, the disparity in meetings, the disparity in exposure, the disparity will all start coming right back. And all those issues that we had before are going to resurface unless we come up with policies and procedures to really address them. And not a lot of companies are doing that right now, which is really unfortunate.
And part of the transition is just readapting to new rhythms, new habits. Kay, you said that about 10 hours of your day can be in Zooms. And I've talked to other people wondering, when I go back to the office, how am I going to get all the work I'm doing in now? And so getting over that hurdle of reshifting, rethinking, re-experiencing, how am I going to take an hour out of my day commuting when it's full already? And that's just just getting new habits and new muscles and new muscle memory. We've also got a social thermostat, being part of the herd. And, we used to have a sense of a certain rhythm and connection with people we saw regularly. That's been disrupted for 2 years. Now we've got a new thermostat set. And again, helping people reacclimate. It's the largest, Bob, I've heard you say this. This is a largest change management experiment in history. And we don't know what we don't know. We just have to take it. When we hit a bump, step back and reevaluate, what do we do? When we hit a bump, step back, reevaluate, what do we do, instead of just trying to push and drive it.
Yeah, and Rex, you and I talked a little bit about this before, though, that we know a large percentage of communication is nonverbal. And so I find it really hard to be presenting to a group of people when you're not in the room with them, when you can't read their body language, or you're not feeding off the energy of that group or that dynamic, or the conversation after the call, or after the meeting isn't happening, or the prep time right before you walk in, or getting those clues from your teammates about things. All of that is missing. And it means that we aren't being as effective, I think, as we could be. And there's some things that you can do very effectively remotely, but there are other things that aren't. And we need to really kind of suss that out a little bit more.
Well, and I think that what you just said is an opportunity for leaders to think about why it's so valuable to come together and how do we communicate this value. That's the thing I think is missing. The strategy, we need to come together, we need to be innovative. But what you just said, all those things that we experience that are a little bit abstract for us now because of 2 years, I think that's the opportunity. Just convey that, show that, help people experience that, and they will want to come back in.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to what I said before about, we're not asking the right questions. Do you want to work from home permanently, or even, the majority of the time? Is it really the right question? Better questions are, what kind of work do you do? And can you do that remotely? What kind of meetings are you in? There are some meetings that are very effective virtually and other ones that are almost impossible to do virtually. And so we need to really get to that. And that should help determine who can and or should. Just because you can work from home does not mean you should work from home. So we need to think about that a little bit deeper.
One of the things I have not seen a lot of conversation about is just the ability for people to get to know each other, understand each other, learn how to work together, and build a common set of values. It's those common experiences that, are void right now. And I think that's where, a lot of organizations build the glue that holds them together.
That's social capital.
Right.
Yeah.
Whenever technology really disrupts and changes and gave us some new capacity, the human system that goes behind it lags. And when there's a big gap between the human system that's fully integrated it and adapted in the technology. So now we've got this remote capability. There's really not a culture, a human system that's developed around this remote capability. It's kind of a bolt-on right now, and it'll take time. Like when the iPhone was introduced and it made every other phone obsolete, it wasn't long before there was a whole new ecosystem of tools and behaviors, and you could do things anywhere. We've just had that same kind of blow up with this remote stuff. I mean, Zoom is a verb now. So we've got some time to figure out all those social dynamics. How do we build and create social cohesion in this new kind of environment? And I don't have answers for that, but the human system hasn't caught up with what we're doing right now. So there is that friction.
I think the challenge is we want answers, and we want, do we go back to the office? Do we work remotely? And I think the real answer lives somewhere in the middle. And it may not be the same answer for everybody. It may not be the same answer for every department. It may not be the answer for every company. And that's what makes this messy, is that we really need to start tailoring the solutions to the situation. And if you want a one size fits all, that's where it's failing. And I think a lot of people are looking at this trying to say, this is what everybody should do. That's never going to be right because we're not all exactly the same. And so the devil is in the detail. There are the nuances, and somewhere in the middle is what we have to do. And so we're really talking to our clients about having a deep understanding about what they're doing, mobility profiles, gathering space, all of those things, and coming up with better solutions. And then understanding you may not get it right. And as people evolve over time and their comfort level changes, you're going to have to adapt and change. And that's hard. And most people don't want to hear that. They just want to hear, this is the answer, do this, and you're fine. That's not the reality, though.
We've got
that adapt
5 minutes.
that adapt and change. I think that people make those decisions because they want to manage their own anxiety, that they made a decision and people will do it. The big shift is what Kay is talking about. How do we develop that curiosity, learn as we go, because we don't know what we don't know. All we know is that whatever we try, our best plans, I mean, it's every project. You got a plan and then it hits reality and then you've got to adapt. Leaders are going to have to get into that mindset that this is iterative. We're going to try and we're going to go. That's one of the hardest qualities for a leader, to have that curiosity learning approach versus get everyone on the same page approach or solve the problem. We can't solve this. We have to navigate it. And it takes a different kind of mindset and the ability to live with the tension of, it may not work. I don't know the answers, but we'll figure it out together.
Yeah, I want to go back to one of the earlier questions, Bob, that you asked, just about the tension between the C-suite and the workforce. And I think everybody is looking at the C-suite. Tell us what we're going to do. I would love to see an email that just said, we've consulted, we've asked opinions, this is where we think we need to be going. But please, we're going to have a lot of empathy for you, but you need to have a little bit of empathy for us because we may not get it right away. And so we're all in this together, and this is all uncharted territory. So this is how we're going to start. If we need to amend it, we will. We want your feedback, but we have to do what's right for our individuals because we value you, but we also have to make sure that this business survives and is resilient. So let's go on this journey together, open minds, open hearts, and we'll change as we need to.
Yeah,
I think you should put that in written form and post it as a letter to our company. I think so many leaders would read that and say, "Oh, I have now got permission to do that." That's brilliant.
Because they think they have to have the answer, and
you're right.
Frankly,
absolutely right.
Some people don't even know what the right question is.
Yeah, I may steal that and put it on a post.
You go for it.
Okay, great.
Hey, this has been a great conversation, and I hate to end it, but we are coming up on our time. So I just want to make sure, I thank both of you. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all of your experience and knowledge with us. We will have a recording of this. So if you either came in late or had to leave early, we'll have this on our site, and then we'll probably do a follow-up article on this. So be sure to tune in next week, where we've got 2 more. This is going to be the end of our series, where we've got Lenny Bedoin, Antonia Cardone, and Lori Lewis talking about what's happening in the corporate world, and then Jeremy Nooner from Google, who's going to be looking to the future to say some exciting things that he sees coming down the path. So this has been great. Thanks to both of you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And stand more, Bob.
Yeah. Yep. Bob, thank you.
All right. See you guys.